gentlemen. So when my wonderful colleague here first proposition came up, one of the first things he said was their case line. And what their entire case is basically based on. And he said, okay, our case is based on this idea of deterrence. We think deterrents work. But we think what our opponents really aren't considering is the very idea of the deterrent itself, and what are deterrents based on? And we on side opposition think that the very nature of deterrence is that they are based on fear. We think that the very fact that side proposition is having their entire case rely on this idea of deterrence is based on the fact that yes, they fear a nuclear Iran, and yes, Iran fears a nuclear rest of the world. We think that, quite frankly, as soon as we come and we talk about this topic of nuclear weapons, of nuclear anything, there is fear to be involved, and we think that this is something that side proposition is clearly ignoring. But now let's talk about some of the more specific aspects of this round. We think that even on these aspects, side opposition has clearly come up on top. And here we see that there are really three main themes that are pervaded throughout this entire debate. The first is, can Iran be trusted? The second is, are deterrents effective? And the third is, what's the best way to deal with nuclear weapons? First of all, can Iran be trusted? Here, side proposition basically agreed with us. He said, oh well, no, Iran can't be trusted, but no one can be trusted. Everywhere is unstable. As the partners have already pointed out, Iran is known to be more unstable than countries like the USA. We think that this is a silly point to argue over. Second of all, our side proposition keeps reaffirming this idea that, oh, well, we can help Iran. What we have to understand is that in the current age, we've seen that Iran doesn't want help. We see that we can't change the past. We already see that there are tensions between the Western world and Iran. We can't just erase them randomly. Quite frankly, Iran doesn't want help. But, we think that in the end, as the partners have already stated, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter if Iran wants help. It doesn't even matter if Iran uses their weapons or not. We think that no matter what, they have to be feared. Now let's go on to my second question, the second theme. Are deterrents effective? Now, side proposition wants you to believe that, of course, no one wants to be nuked. Of course deterrents are effective. But we think that side proposition is, quite frankly, simplifying a very, very complicated issue. We don't think that international politics works that simply. We think that, first of all, there are situations where people will use nuclear weapons intentionally. We see that there are situations where countries will do things that are suicidal. And we see that these situations happen most often when a country has a lot of problems, when a country is, as our opponents mentioned themselves, when a country has civil conflicts or economic conflicts. And we think even if we don't look at Iran's government itself, there are people within Iran who have already made it clear that they are totally okay, that they don't care at all about things like nuclear destruction. Again, let's look at terrorists. We think that, quite frankly, we can't just simplify this issue. Global affairs, government affairs, nuclear weapons are a messy topic. They're not something that you can simply overgeneralize as our opponents have been doing. Now let's talk about our final question. What really is the best way to deal with nuclear weapons, all nuclear weapons, not just weapons in Iraq? We think that all nuclear weapons are to be feared. We think that even nuclear weapons in the hands of countries that are actually really stable, that are actually not very hostile, countries like the United States, countries like France, countries like Russia and Japan, we think that no matter what, nuclear weapons are to be feared. These are things that are so destructive, things that are so unerasable, that no matter what we're talking about, they have to be feared. And no matter what we're talking about, they have to be treated with caution. And it's really for this reason that the resolution has to stand. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Let's take a step back, ladies and gentlemen. We see side opposition is defending a side that we have seen today is leading to a lack of trust between countries like Western liberal democracies and Iran, and is leading to insecurity. Now, what is side opposition's plan for this? They said, yes, we should continue to live in a state of fear, we should continue to live in a state of insecurity, where we don't know what's going on, where we don't really know how and what Iran is doing. Now, of course, they brought up many points about how Iran isn't even disclosing the fact that they're making nuclear weapons. But the reason for this, ladies and gentlemen, is because there's no sense of trust between them. We want to build a bond between Iran and Western liberal democracies, and the only way to do that, ladies and gentlemen, is to help Iran's motives, which today we've seen is not as violent or volatile as side opposition is making them. So what am I going to do in this final rebuttal speech? I'd like to bring out 3 themes that have really been the general 3 themes of this debate. We've seen 3 themes: number 1, society; number 2, deterrence; and number 3, the long-term benefits. And by going over each of these themes, I will essentially show you why side proposition has won this debate. So let's look into society. They brought up this constant point about terrorists, and how terrorists, we're completely oversimplifying this case, because we aren't considering that terrorists are there, and terrorists could take over, and perhaps even take over these nuclear weapons and provide a threat to Western liberal democracies. What they don't understand, ladies and gentlemen, is that if you don't do anything about this issue, there's a lot bigger chance that terrorists will take over nuclear weapons in Iran, then being able to help Iran in making these nuclear weapons, but also being able to protect these nuclear weapons, ladies and gentlemen. Because if Iran isn't even disclosing the fact that they're making nuclear weapons right now, and since there's no bond or trust, of course, when terrorists take it over, ladies and gentlemen, we wouldn't know too much about it. We wouldn't be able to prevent such an action from occurring. Then when we could actually help Iran to be able to be peaceful within the region, and to be able to help Iran actually control their nuclear weapons at a standard high. Now they talked about many different things about how terrorists can take over and all these points, of course. But ladies and gentlemen, if we live in such a state of fear, how can we progress? How can we have any type of say in the world if we're constantly living in a state of fear? We would see that many people today say that instead of staying back from your fears, you should face your fears, ladies and gentlemen. It's a common sense point, and today we would see that we're doing just that. Now they talked about this factor about a volatile leader, and how this leader is someone who's been able to and he said that Israel is a bad country, of course Jewish people should be killed, and we're coming after you. Ladies and gentlemen, we would see that, of course, any leader wouldn't say any praise about their enemy. That's something for sure. A leader who has hatred for their enemy will say hatred for their enemy no matter what. And we see that to be able to make this region a lot more protected, to not be able to make it more volatile, we see that volatile actions only occur when one person has an advantage over another person. But today, ladies and gentlemen, if we can equalize both standards, we would see that both countries would be at the same nuclear capacity, or the same nuclear capability, and would fear this factor of a second strike capability, which is the reason why the Iranian people won't go after the Jewish people itself. Now, let's go, of course, into the second point of deterrence. Now, they said this is our entire point about a side proposition, but the reason we've been constantly elaborating upon this point is that it's a point that they've not clashed at all with. All they've said is that the country is unstable, which is why we can't really trust the country itself. But ladies and gentlemen, we've of course already gone through that, and how the country is unstable. But we need to help that country become stable in the first place. And the first way that we can have some sort of connection between Iran and Western liberal democracies is by allowing them to have nuclear weapons, which would be able to create peace within the region. Now, we've given you examples like Mao's China, we've talked about India and Pakistan and how the situation has worked there. We've talked about the Cold War, and we've talked about Brazil and Argentina. But all side opposition is talking about is if. They haven't proven any certain example that has proved out where deterrence has not worked in the first place, ladies and gentlemen. And some of these grounds, of course, that we've won. And of course, the long-term benefits and how we would advocate peace in the region. We would advocate that each country should be stable, each country should be able to have the right to protect themselves, and ladies and gentlemen. And for these reasons that we beg to propose